Welcome back to Globewise Entertainment, the channel where we dive deep into the wildest, most shocking, and untold stories from the world of cinema. Today, we're uncovering 10 banned 70s movies that got their directors sued, films so controversial they sparked lawsuits, censorship battles, and courtroom drama that changed Hollywood forever. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our growing community of movie lovers. And don't forget, tell us in the comments which of these banned 70s classics surprised you the most. Your pick might just show up in our next video. 1. The Thorn, 1974. The Jesus comedy that went too far. In 1974, a little-known film called The Thorn caused one of the strangest scandals in 1970s cinema. Marketed as a biblical satire, the movie attempted to poke fun at religion by presenting the story of Jesus in a bizarre, comedic light. What made it even more infamous was its unusual star, Bette Midler, appearing in her first ever film role years before she became the beloved, divine Miss M. At first, the film was released quietly under the name The Divine Mr. J. But once Bette Midler shot to stardom as a Grammy-winning singer, producers saw dollar signs. They quickly rebranded the movie as The Thorn and shamelessly promoted it as if Midler were its leading star, despite the fact that she only played a minor role. This marketing trick backfired spectacularly. Midler sued the filmmakers for exploiting her rising fame and misleading audiences into thinking this was her breakout film. The lawsuit gained national attention, and Midler's fans felt deceived, leading to protests and boycotts. Censorship boards across the US and parts of Europe slammed the movie for mocking religious figures and considered it borderline blasphemous. Some theaters even banned it outright, fearing backlash from church groups. Between the lawsuit, the controversy, and the negative press, The Thorn quickly disappeared from theaters, but not before cementing its reputation as one of the most ill-fated exploitation films of the decade. Today, The Thorn is remembered less for its content and more for how it turned a rising star against its creators, got its director sued, and became a cautionary tale about misleading marketing in Hollywood. 2. The Devil in Miss Jones, 1973. When people think of 1970s cinema, they often imagine gritty crime dramas, experimental art films, or political thrillers. But in 1973, a movie came along that broke every rule, blurred every line, and ended up dragging its director into a courtroom. That film was The Devil in Miss Jones. Directed by Gerard Damiano, the same filmmaker behind the infamous Deep Throat, this movie shocked audiences with its blend of erotic imagery and existential storytelling. On the surface, it was marketed as an adult feature, but beneath the controversy, the film explored heavy themes, loneliness, regret, and the haunting consequences of wasted life. In fact, some critics even compared it to works of European art cinema, except this one was filled with scenes the censors couldn't ignore. The plot followed Justine Jones, a woman who takes her own life only to find herself in limbo, denied entry to heaven. Her only path forward is to experience sin before being condemned to eternal damnation. The mix of explicit scenes and philosophical questions made the film both intellectually daring and legally dangerous. And dangerous it was. The film became a runaway underground hit, earning millions at the box office during a time when adult films were still finding their way into mainstream theaters. But success brought lawsuits. Religious groups, morality watchdogs, and even state prosecutors launched cases against the film and its director, accusing it of obscenity and corruption. Damiano found himself sued multiple times, with courts debating whether The Devil in Miss Jones was a work of art or simply indecency hiding behind artistic pretensions. In some states, screenings were raided, prints of the film were seized, and theater owners faced fines. Ironically, all the legal battles only made the film more famous, cementing its status as one of the most notorious banned movies of the decade. Today, The Devil in Miss Jones is often remembered as a bold attempt to merge arthouse philosophy with adult filmmaking, a combination that pushed freedom of expression to its limits and forced courts to reconsider where censorship should end and art should begin. It wasn't just a scandal, it was a turning point in the fight over what could and could not be shown on screen. 3. Pink Flamingos, 1972. If there's one movie that embodies the phrase, "so shocking it could only come from the 70s, it's John Waters' cult classic, Pink Flamingos. Released in 1972, this underground midnight movie didn't just push boundaries, it blew them to pieces. Starring the legendary drag icon Divine, the film reveled in deliberate bad taste, showcasing outrageous acts that left audiences either laughing uncontrollably or storming out of theaters in disgust. But the controversy wasn't just about audience reactions. Pink Flamingos became one of the most banned and legally challenged films of the decade. In the United Kingdom, it was targeted under the Obscene Publications Act, leading to raids on video stores and even private collectors. In Australia and Canada, screenings were often cancelled after police intervention, while in parts of Europe, authorities brought obscenity charges against distributors and even threatened Waters himself with legal action. What made it so dangerous in the eyes of censors? The film's unapologetic shock value, graphic sexual scenes, taboo-breaking humor, and of course, its infamous, jaw-dropping finale that ensured its place in cinematic infamy. Lawsuits and obscenity trials followed in multiple countries, sparking debates over art versus obscenity and, ironically, making the film more famous than it ever could have been otherwise. Despite the lawsuits, bans, and attempts to bury it, Pink Flamingos thrived in the underground circuit, eventually achieving cult status and transforming John Waters into the so-called Pope of Trash. Today, what once got him sued and censored is now celebrated as a groundbreaking piece of transgressive cinema. A reminder that sometimes, controversy is the very thing that guarantees cinematic immortality. 4. Last Tango in Paris, 1972. Few films from the 1970s shocked the world quite like Last Tango in Paris. Directed by Bernardo Bertolucci and starring Hollywood legend Marlon Brando alongside French actress Maria Schneider, the movie became infamous not just for its raw sexuality, but for the firestorm of lawsuits and outrage it unleashed across the globe. The story follows a grief-stricken American widower who begins a torrid, nameless affair with a young Parisian woman. But what was meant to be a daring exploration of passion and alienation quickly turned into one of cinema's most scandalous controversies. When the film premiered, audiences were stunned. Religious groups called it pornography disguised as art, while censors in several countries outright banned it. In Italy, prosecutors even brought criminal charges against Bertolucci, accusing him of obscenity. Shockingly, Bertolucci was convicted, not just fined, but stripped of his civil rights for 5 years. He lost the right to vote and to work in Italy for nearly half a decade, making this case one of the harshest legal punishments ever given to a director in film history. And the lawsuits didn't stop there. Maria Schneider, who was only 19 during filming, later revealed she felt manipulated and humiliated, sparking decades of backlash against both Bertolucci and Brando. Her claims led to further debates about ethics, consent, and abuse of power in Hollywood, giving the movie a disturbing legacy that still echoes today. Yet despite, or perhaps because of, the lawsuits and bans, Last Tango in Paris became a global box office sensation, earning over $100 million worldwide. It remains a haunting example of how controversy can both destroy reputations and cement cinematic legend. This wasn't just a banned film, it was a courtroom battlefield that put a director's freedom on the line and forever changed how the world views art, censorship, and responsibility in filmmaking. 5. The Devils, 1971. Ken Russell's The Devils isn't just one of the most infamous films of the 1970s, it's one of the most shocking ever made. Based on Aldous Huxley's The Devils of Loudun and John Whiting's play, this brutal historical drama mixed religion, politics, and raw human desire in a way that terrified censors and outraged entire governments. The film tells the story of Father Urbain Grandier, a priest accused of witchcraft after rejecting a nun's advances, all set against the backdrop of plague, political corruption, and religious hysteria. But it wasn't just the story, it was the imagery. Russell filled the film with scenes of orgiastic nuns, torture, and grotesque violence against the church, culminating in a shocking exorcism sequence that left audiences horrified. Warner Brothers quickly found themselves in hot water. Religious groups across the US, UK, and Europe demanded the movie be banned, calling it blasphemous and obscene. Some critics labeled it pornography disguised as art. The backlash grew so intense that lawsuits were filed against the director and studio, claiming the film defamed the Catholic Church and desecrated sacred symbols. In Britain, several city councils outright banned the film, while in the US, censors forced Russell to make heavy cuts before it could even be released. Even then, theaters faced picket lines and lawsuits just for screening it. In fact, The Devils became so legally entangled that Warner Brothers locked away the uncut version for decades. To this day, the fully restored film remains nearly impossible to see legally in many countries. What makes The Devils even more controversial is that critics who dared to defend it called it a masterpiece of political and religious satire. Others claimed Ken Russell had gone too far in his obsession with shocking audiences. Regardless of where people stood, the lawsuits, censorship, and bans cemented The Devils as one of the most dangerous films of the 1970s. Even now, over 50 years later, the film's legend lives on as a movie that pushed cinema to its breaking point, proving that sometimes, art can be powerful enough to get its own creator dragged into court. 6. Monty Python's Life of Brian, 1979. In 1979, the legendary British comedy troupe Monty Python unleashed one of the most controversial films of the decade, Life of Brian. On the surface, it was a hilarious satire about a man named Brian, born on the same day as Jesus, who is mistakenly worshipped as the Messiah. But for religious groups, the film was seen as blasphemy of the highest order. What began as a quirky parody turned into a worldwide scandal. In the United States, several states banned screenings, while entire countries, like Ireland and Norway, slapped outright bans on the film. Posters in Sweden even mocked the ban by calling it so funny it was banned in Norway. But it wasn't just bans that haunted the Pythons. The film's biting religious satire provoked lawsuits from offended groups who claimed the film defamed Christianity. Religious organizations dragged the filmmakers into legal battles, hoping to silence what they saw as heresy. Though the Monty Python team ultimately won in court, the lawsuits drained time, money, and energy, adding fuel to the film's already notorious reputation. Ironically, all the outrage made Life of Brian even more successful. What was meant to be banned and buried became a global cult classic, celebrated as one of the greatest comedies ever made. Today, the lawsuits and bans are remembered not as scars, but as proof that comedy can shake the world just as powerfully as drama or horror. 7. Caligula, 1979. When History Meets Scandal. Few films from the 1970s created as much chaos, scandal, and courtroom drama as Caligula, 1979. On paper, it sounded like a daring masterpiece, a high-budget historical epic about the rise and fall of Rome's most infamous emperor, Caligula. The cast was stacked with respected talent, Malcolm McDowell, Helen Mirren, and Peter O'Toole, and the script was penned by none other than celebrated novelist Gore Vidal. But behind the glamour, Caligula was a powder keg waiting to explode. The film was financed by Penthouse magazine founder Bob Guccione, who had his own vision for the project, one far more explicit than director Tinto Brass ever imagined. What began as a provocative historical drama spiraled into a full-blown war between artistic ambition and raw sensationalism. During editing, Guccione secretly added graphic unsimulated sex scenes filmed with adult performers, effectively transforming Caligula from a controversial drama into something resembling high-budget pornography. When the director and cast discovered these changes, they were outraged. Tinto Brass immediately disowned the film, Gore Vidal sued to have his name removed from the credits, and lawsuits piled up from almost every creative angle. Despite, or perhaps because of, the scandal, Caligula became a lightning rod for controversy worldwide. It was banned outright in several countries, heavily censored in others, and dragged into years of legal battles over obscenity, creative ownership, and artistic rights. In the end, the film's notoriety outlived its lawsuits. Caligula stands today as one of cinema's most infamous cautionary tales, a reminder of what happens when money, power, and unchecked ambition clash on the big screen. For audiences, it remains a shocking cult artifact. For its director, it was a career-defining battle that proved how dangerous creative compromise can be. 8. Cocksucker Blues, 1972. When it comes to controversial rock documentaries, none is more infamous than Cocksucker Blues, a film so raw, so scandalous, that it nearly destroyed careers before it was even released. Directed by avant-garde filmmaker Robert Frank, the movie followed the Rolling Stones on their 1972 American tour. What Frank captured, however, was not the glossy, larger-than-life image the band's management wanted the world to see. Instead, the film revealed the unfiltered chaos behind the scenes: drug use, groupies, trashed hotel rooms, and moments the Stones themselves found too damning for public consumption. The title itself, Cocksucker Blues, was already controversial, taken from a tongue-in-cheek, sexually explicit song the band recorded to get out of their contract with Decca Records. But the real scandal came when the band saw Frank's cut. It wasn't a glamorous portrait of rock stardom. It was a raw, unflinching exposé of debauchery that could have invited criminal investigations. Terrified of the fallout, the Stones took legal action against their own director. They sued Robert Frank in an effort to stop the film from ever being released. The court eventually ruled in Frank's favor, but with one bizarre restriction: the film could only be shown at non-commercial screenings, and only when the director himself was physically present. That ruling effectively buried Cocksucker Blues from mainstream release. For decades, it lived in the shadows as a whispered legend, screened only at rare events, with bootleg copies circulating among die-hard fans. Ironically, the legal battle only increased the movie's cult status. Today, Cocksucker Blues is remembered as one of the most authentic, if dangerous, rock documentaries ever made, a forbidden time capsule of the excesses of the 1970s. It's a perfect example of how a film could be too real, too raw, and too risky for the world to handle. 9. Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, 1970. When legendary film critic Roger Ebert teamed up with controversial director Russ Meyer, Hollywood expected something daring, but no one could have predicted Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. Released in 1970, this wild, campy, X-rated musical drama blended sex, drugs, and rock and roll into a chaotic satire that shocked audiences. Although the title suggested a sequel to the hit Valley of the Dolls, 1967, the studio made it clear this was not an official continuation. Still, the marketing implied otherwise, and that's where the trouble began. The owners of Jacqueline Suzanne's original novel felt misled, arguing the movie damaged the reputation of their brand. Fox and Meyer were dragged into lawsuits, accused of false association and exploitation. But the controversy didn't stop there. The film's explicit sexuality, drug references, and graphic violence led to bans in several countries, including the UK, where censors claimed it was morally corrupting. In America, critics were split. Some called it trash, others hailed it as a psychedelic cult masterpiece. Ironically, the lawsuits only fueled its notoriety. The film went on to make millions at the box office, proving once again that in Hollywood, scandal sells. Today, Beyond the Valley of the Dolls is celebrated as one of the most outrageous cult classics of the 1970s, a bizarre blend of satire, excess, and lawsuits that made Meyer and Ebert infamous. 10. Carnal Knowledge, 1971. When Carnal Knowledge hit theaters in 1971, it was already stirring controversy. Directed by Mike Nichols, the film starred Jack Nicholson, Art Garfunkel, and Margaret, and Candice Bergen, but its bold subject matter wasn't about action, horror, or political rebellion. Instead, it shocked audiences with its raw and brutally honest exploration of sex, relationships, and male desire. The film didn't shy away from taboo topics like casual hookups, emotional manipulation, and sexual dysfunction, all portrayed with a level of frankness rarely seen in mainstream Hollywood at the time. Nicholson's character, Jonathan, embodied the misogynistic, disillusioned man of the era, leaving audiences both fascinated and disturbed. But controversy really exploded a few years later. In 1972, a screening in Albany, Georgia, ended with the local theater manager being arrested and charged with distributing obscene material. The authorities argued that the film was essentially pornography disguised as art. This led to a full-scale court battle that climbed its way up through appeals. At one point, the Georgia Supreme Court even upheld the obscenity ruling, essentially labeling carnal knowledge illegal. Nichols and his team were facing the possibility of a precedent-setting censorship nightmare that could have crippled artistic freedom in Hollywood. Finally, in 1974, the U.S. Supreme Court intervened, ruling in favor of the film, stating that carnal knowledge was not obscene and was, in fact, a work of serious artistic and social value. The decision became a landmark case in American film law, protecting directors and studios from being dragged into court every time a movie pushed boundaries. Instead of killing Mike Nichols' career, the controversy made him a legend. Carnal knowledge not only survived the lawsuits but became a cultural milestone, proving that adult themes could be explored with depth and sophistication on the big screen. To this day, the case remains one of the most important moments in the fight against movie censorship. What was once labeled smut is now recognized as a bold, intelligent dissection of love and sexuality in modern America. And that wraps up our countdown of 10 banned 70s movies that got their directors sued. These films didn't just entertain. They shook up the system, tested the limits of free expression, and left a mark on cinema history. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Globewise Entertainment for more incredible deep dives into Hollywood's most shocking stories. And we'd love to hear from you. Which of these banned 70s movies surprised you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and who knows, your pick might inspire our next video. Until next time, keep watching, keep questioning, and keep the love for cinema alive.